And we're back again for the final session of this special board meeting. This next session, we're going to be talking on our conflict of interest policy and our code of ethics. Because the governance team has taken this on and David has been the chair of that committee, I'm going to be turning this part of the meeting over to David to chair. So
okay.
Over to you.
Thank you, Sherry. It's 7:30, and the first thing on the agenda is member comments. Do we have any comments? Erwin?
Erwin, Patty.
Okay, Patty. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to the de facto chairman of the ethics subcommittee, if not the real chairman, John Mooney.
Good evening. The ethics subcommittee, which is David, Victoria, and I, have been working along with Kate and with periodic legal review with our attorney, Ken Chadwick, on doing a draft code of ethics. So here's what we want to do tonight. And it's important that we do all of it, especially parts B and C, in order to be able to move forward and meet our goal of enacting, as we have promised we will try to do, enacting the Code of Ethics by the end of this year. So we want to do a quick tour of the Code of Ethics, which is now on the Reston Association website. This is the text here. It's on the website. Secondly, we want to get board feedback on it, on the presentation tonight, and also guidance on the issues that we're going to raise, especially about the conflict of interest policy and statement. And then finally, we're going to discuss the calendar forward. So we will be switching presentations. I'll do some, Victoria will do some, and David will do some. So next slide. So the code is proposed to have 5 parts. A preface, which is not a simple howdy-do, but is substantive. It sets the conceptual framework for the whole document. So it really has a certain normative quality itself. Secondly, we will discuss the actual norms, some 40 of them. Thirdly, we will discuss a section called Strengthening Our Ethical Culture as Directors and as Officers. Fourthly, we're not going to discuss because it's not done, but it's simply a signature phrase, a signature page, which I want the board to help design, but it's basically to make an annual commitment. The newly elected board after the elections, in the first meeting after the elections, will sign this as a commitment together to adhere to our Code of Ethics. And finally, we will discuss the revised Board and Association Operations Resolution 6, also known as the Conflict of Interest Policy and Statement. So that has to be completed after tonight's meeting because we need your feedback to do it. It would have been a waste of time to do it without discussion with the board. So the preface, may I ask how many have been able to read the code? Okay.
Skim through it.
Okay. So the preface talks about the origin of the code. So its origins are ancient because people have always been concerned that the governance people who have the force of coercion over their lives in certain respects be just, because they exercise coercion in the name over the community and in the name of the community. But it also has recent origins because of concerns arising out of the whole issue with the lake house. So because of that, we began in 2016 with the help of Quantum, which is a consultancy firm, to work on a code of ethics. And it's important to say a bit about that because a lot of work was done reviewing relevant documents, reviewing videos of actual board meetings to see what happened there, doing online surveys with stakeholders in the organization, and also conducting 17 in-depth interviews. A list of proposed concerns or norms was generated. Of the 40 or so norms that you will see tonight, a good 75%, I would think, came from those discussions. But we winnowed them, we made them clearer, we combined where a combination was called for. So this document is in continuity with the concerns of members of Reston Association as expressed during that process begun back in 2016. In May of this year, this committee was formed. We've worked on it. We've done a couple of drafts. Initially, we were going to do a code of ethics for everybody associated with Reston, so the board of directors, the officers, the employees, the volunteers. We soon decided that would be foolhardy. So this only addresses directors on the board, and it addresses the officers. So the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. The conceptual foundations of the code. The foundation is really the notion of intentional community. What does that mean? It means, there's a lovely phrase at the end of the movie, Another Way of Living, where Bob Simon himself says, community is what it's all about. So that's really who we are, and ethics expresses the best and most authentic of ourselves. That's what really ethics does. And so the foundation, the keystone is the notion of intentional community, that we're not together by happenstance but by choice, and that choice indeed is formulated in terms of the various covenants that bind us together. There are three key concepts. So one is common good, which we talk about a lot. And common good is not just the greatest good for the greatest number, because that means the smallest number can be screwed royally. It's what the founders called the tyranny of the majority. Nor is it simply an aggregation of what David wants, and Sherry wants, and Sridhar wants, and Eric wants, and you sum it all up, and that's the common good. It's a more complex, dynamic interrelationship of the duties and responsibilities of being a member of community. But the goal of community is always the greatest possible flourishing of the members. So it's about individuals, but it's individuals in their community, okay? And that plays, read the whole thing, we don't have time to go into it. The second concept is civility. So civility is not simply some anemic political correctness, which people deride, justly sometimes. But it is dealing with each other with respect for the truth and respect for persons. And that is what we want to characterize the board and indeed the whole community. And finally, conflict of interest. Management of conflict of interest is one of the most complex things. We'll get into it later.
Sorry.
In the managing of conflict of interest, there are many different things. The basic definition is where, let me read it so that I can be brief. It's most broadly speaking, any situation in which a person must choose between two or more incompatible claims for his or her support. Okay? And in the context of an organization like Reston Association, it means the good of Reston Association versus other interests I might have or those I am close to might have. It's obviously important. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You can read it online. The thing is, we need to finish in a half an hour so we can have an hour of discussion. Okay, but we talk about the definition of it, its organizational importance, the elements of it, types of conflicts of interest, so you can have financial, non-financial, you can have direct involving me, or indirect involving my family and friends, etc. There are two basic obligations that you must deal with in managing conflicts of interest. One is disclosure, but the primary one is choice, the choices we make. That is where most laws concerning conflict of interest focus their attention is on the choices we make. Disclosure is important, but it's secondary to how we handle the choices we make on the board or in the conduct of RA business generally. Let's see, I will say only this. This code will do three main things about the conflict of interest, but we need some board guidance on how to do it. One is we're going to revise the, and you've been given copies of this, and we'll talk about it a bit more, quite a bit more, the, again, Resolution 6, Conflict of Interest Policy and Statement. Secondly, we have decided to focus this solely on financial self-interest. We are not going to, in this statement, deal with non-financial self-interest. So where I use my position for my own fame or for personal relationships, and there are reasons we'll get into why we're doing that. And basically it's because Virginia state legislation and indeed our own Enabling Act focuses uniquely on financial self-interest, not non-financial conflict of interest anymore. So the non-financial conflicts of interest, which are important, will be dealt with in actually Section 2.2 of the code. Okay? Okay. Now it's your turn.
So for our norms, we're just going to go over these relatively quickly. The norms that we want to focus on are going to be respect for persons, dedication to the common good, stewardship of our resources, respect for the truth, respect for the law, and competency. We're going to have aspirational norms and obligatory norms. The aspirational norms are those norms that we want to strive for, and the obligatory norms are the norms that we absolutely must have. So in the first one, respect for persons, our aspirationals are civility and respect throughout the RA. Our obligatory is not to abuse, demean, belittle, or disparage. And that includes no sexual harassment. We shall not discriminate, and we'll keep confidential any private information. Okay. Our next norms, dedication to the common good. Our aspirational norms for the directors and officers include preserving and fostering inclusiveness, unity and collaboration of all RA members, and servant leadership. In addition, trust and RA. Our norms for dedication to the common good continued. We want to make sure that our obligatory norms are to use sound judgment, our best possible decision for the common good of the RA. We will perform our duties with fairness and without bias. We will follow RA's conflict of interest policy and statement, and we will not advantage ourselves either directly or indirectly in a manner that disadvantages the RA or harms its reputation. We will not coerce, solicit, or accept any gift or benefit. We will not make decisions based on familial relationships, friendships, or other affiliations. And we will not undermine the implementation of duly adopted BOD decisions or policies. That's probably one of the most important ones on there. We may not like what we decide to do, but we will not undermine the decision of the board. We will be sure to provide appropriate opportunities for member comment. We will keep the promises made on RA matters, and we will not interject partisan politics. As it relates to stewardship of resources, our aspirational norms are to make decisions about and monitor our financial assets, our physical assets, and our environmental assets. Our obligatory norms are to comply with the standards established in 2.2.1 above for the stewardship of all RA resources. And that 2.2.1 above, remind me?
Yeah, it basically says that we must use what we learned in director school. We must use our best judgment as prudent persons to make sound judgments and choices for Reston Association. It's state law.
And very importantly, we will not personally spend RA money or use other RA resources except for official RA purposes. Honor, respect for the truth. Our aspirational norms are to promote honesty and truth-telling, acknowledge our mistakes, and when appropriate, declassify information and documentation. I think that's a super important item for aspirational norms for us. Our obligatory norms would be to not tell deliberate falsehoods, fully disclose to other directors and officers at the earliest opportunity information or facts that would have a significant impact on decision making, and be transparent as possible to the membership. Our obligatory norms also include maintain our confidentiality about RA issues to the extent such confidentiality is permitted by law and critical to the common good of the RA. So there's going to be times when we do need to go into executive session. We're just going to manage that. More specifically, as the last point, deliberate in executive session only those matters permitted by law in executive session. In respect for the law, our aspirational norms will be to enact only reasonable rules and amend any existing rules that are no longer reasonable or that are contrary to the common good. And as necessary, we will do our best to follow Robert's Rules of Order in BOD meetings to ensure that we can hear each other and that we can treat each other a little bit respectfully. Our obligatory norms. We will conduct our business with applicable federal, state, local law and ordinances with Reston's amended deed bylaws and resolutions. We won't interfere with the system of management established by Reston's amended deed bylaws or resolutions. And as necessary and appropriate, affirmatively enforce Reston's amended deed restrictions, bylaws, and resolutions and rules against individuals or groups that violate or threaten them. Our norms for competency. This one is, I find, super important for us. Aspirationally, we will do our best to become competent in the key issues facing Reston. Bless you. When not already competent, timely seek competent assistance and training, and carefully balance our established and tested methods of RA governance with promoting new innovations. And I think we're looking really hard into promoting the new innovations. Our obligatory norm will be to resist hasty and ill-informed decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay, David.
Okay, on to the next thing, strengthening the ethical culture of the directors and officers. First, I think it's very important that each individual director and officer should be committed to following and modeling the code in word and deed. So it's a very personal thing on behalf of the directors and officers that they should be doing this. And then when they see others that may not be doing that, it's very important that that be pointed out directly to them, but to be done so in a collegial and private way wherever possible. And then and the next one would be to communicate the code to the full RA membership, inviting the members to hold directors and officers accountable to the code. And then there would come the aspect of continuing ethical formation. By that we would mean that the board would occupy its time with training, discussions, consensus building around these ethical norms. And then the next item would be the Ethics Review Committee. The intent would be, and this is all laid out in the handout, that there would be the formation of a committee that would be composed of two directors of the RA and then 3 general RA members. They would serve for staggered terms of 3 years, and they would be selected by a 2/3 vote of the board of directors. They would draft bylaws that would then be approved by the board. And after that, they would be ready to receive complaints. And the complaint procedure would be that they would be made to the committee, and they would decide whether the complaint was credible. And if the complaint was credible, a formal hearing, either public or non-public, at the discretion of the accused, either officer or director, would take place. And the ruling of the committee would be several could actually occur. They could find that the complaint was unfounded, and then they could find that the complaint was founded. And if it was founded, they could take this following action. They could issue a private censure, they could issue a public censure, And they could, thirdly, if they felt it was appropriate, they could call for the board to initiate a removal action. And that would be done in one of two ways, either by referendum, or the second one would be by declaring the director to have effected his or her own deemed resignation ipso facto by serious violations of the code. And I have to point out that this second part will require Board of Directors amendment of the bylaws to specify serious violations of the code as a violation of the association documents. So that would be something to be done if this were approved. From that, there could be appeals, and if the appeals were unsuccessful by the director or the officer, then the removal action would take place, or there would be the declaration that we pointed out above that will have to be part of the amended bylaws. So that's pretty much it in a very quick couple minutes.
Thanks, David. And I will point out about this whole code that reading the comments, hearing comments just in the general conduct of business, we wanted to stress both transparency and accountability. And we had struggles about some of these because, if anything, this code as drafted, including in a very bracing way what David just went over, really are tough on accountability and transparency. We decided to put it out in a strong form. And there could be arguments, and have been arguments, made about such a strong form, that indeed it puts officers and directors at some disadvantage, expose them to unfair treatment or unfair expectations. But we decided to put it out in this way. We believe that in the end we stand behind the recommendations, but I do not want to hide the fact that they are tough. It's a tough set of expectations we're proposing for the directors and the officers.
But at the same time, I want to point out that initially, I think when we were talking about the committee, the ethics committee, there seemed to be a concern that I think we finally have addressed, that the accused has to be afforded his rights or her rights. Right. And I think we've tried to accomplish that through not only what they can do at the hearing level, but also the appellate level.
Appeal level. So we tried to build checks and balances in. But it is very strong on transparency. It is very strong on accountability, which we read in the previous work done on the code, and we heard frequently in this room and on the streets. So let's now turn to the next part. So it's board feedback. So there are two parts to it. One is preliminary overall feedback from what you've read or heard rushed through this evening. And then secondly, more guidance on revising the conflict of interest policy and statement. So let's go over them one by one. So please give us your candid, and this is, unfortunately, there's only time for board discussion now. There will be time, and that's why we want to get this done tonight, so that we can get a version out for community comment, and we will hold sessions with the community on this. But we need board comment tonight. So on the first three parts that you've heard, the preface, the norms, ethical culture, could you comment candidly, please? Because we are your servants. We're the servants of Reston Association, and in this instance also of the board. Tell us, is it clear? Does it seem complete? Is it reasonable? Is the length or complexity too great?
Do you want to start?
No, you go.
I'm actually blown away by everything you guys have put together, truly. I focused in on the actual norms, and I like the fact that you distinguish between the things we're trying to be, that we admit we're not perfect at, in the aspirational norms, and then those things that, by God, you got to go to the speed limit. You just have to follow those rules. And I think that that's important, because sometimes people expect you to be perfect, and we're just not. And so I appreciated the fact that you had them, and to say, were they complete? Absolutely. I can't think of a single thing you might have left out. And I challenge any of my peers to try to find one that they might have left out. But I liked that. I've never actually seen norms written. I've never actually seen norms written that way, and I think that was good, especially something as delicate as your ethics, because it's very personal. I would say on the preface, that's got John Mooney written all over it. I love
Why do you accuse me?
It just sounds like you all the way through. I appreciate the context of setting the stage, instead of just giving us a list of norms and saying, here you go, and this is what you got to do. I like the context.
Is it too long or too complex?
John, you do take several pages to say something I think could be said shorter, but I can't tell you exactly what I would take out. So if you challenge me to try to do that, I can certainly try to do that. But once you read it, you say, this is good. When you pick it up and you're like, really, do I have to read all this? But then once you read it, you're like, I get it. I get why this is important. So that's my first set of comments. So I'll turn it over. Julie's aching to say
Lily,
something.
and then-
Having been on the previous attempt
Yep.
to create such a document, we kind of stalled on it. I found it refreshing to read because I could internalize it. It was real, it was conversational, it was very communicative. So I appreciated that a lot. I'm not so sure about some of the things that you put in obligatory versus aspirational. There's one or two things there that I'm kind of,
Sometimes it was a thin line, but which way to go? So
Yeah.
Give us your feedback.
So I can, tell you what some of those were. I'll give you an example right now, because I did really like the preface. So
I didn't hear that last
the
thing.
preface, I
Okay.
really like that. So on 229, keep promises made on RA matters unless proportionately important new considerations to make their fulfillment impossible or contrary to good. Some of these things I read, I'm going, well, okay, so that's up for a lot of interpretation on what is a promise. How is that defined? So part of my reading of this document was also, if I was the accuser or the accused, would it be defensible? Would I have the same, interpretation on that? So to me, there's some elements there that need to be, and I'm sure the lawyers could help.
The reason you got a hard copy, I would ask you to mark it up with your comments and give it to us.
Okay.
Okay?
There was one where it said at the earliest convenient, well, what's early and to whom and whatever. You did not state specifically on this is back on the hearings, the formal hearing, committee and the hearing. You didn't say specifically by whom and of whom. I think it's like 5D, 5D.
So
Okay.
we
And it
are,
shall hold a formal hearing.
page 13.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed your definition of who would conduct that hearing and who
It's
would?
the committee.
The ethics review
It
committee.
says,
ethics
then it shall hold.
And the committee will have
That's
3
defined
outside
above
members.
in the first sentence of 5.
Okay, well, I guess it didn't jump out at me when I was multitasking. And then I had one other somewhere, if I can find it. Oh, BI. When you talked about the referendums, and you said that one of them may require an amendment, I guess I thought that the first one might require an amendment too.
Well, we'll let Ken talk about it, but our basic understanding, after having studied the documents, is that the standard way of removing a director is by a referendum.
Right,
A referendum in
By the
which
people
those who
who-
voted for him
Right.
vote.
right.
However, in subsequent discussions, and actually Kate found this opportunity, but that's such an expensive and laborious thing, that Kate had an insight which she discussed at least to some degree with Ken, and which we've incorporated in
B2.
B2.
Correct.
Romanet 2, where by combining two provisions, one from the amended bylaws and the other from the deed, it may be possible, with perhaps a bit more clarification of the bylaws, to include violations of this code as a violation of the association documents, and by terms of the
Right.
of the deed, that is one of the 5 conditions where there is a deemed resignation. That means without anybody
Right.
kicking me off, I have kicked myself off
Ipso
by
facto.
what I have done. Ipso
Yeah,
facto.
yeah. And my last comment is, I
That
noted,
needs more legal review.
right. My last one was that, while I believe you only took this to the board, our previous discussion on ethics also included asking for our volunteers and different, because in essence, they are representing us.
Right.
When we appoint them and choose them. But would such a document, here's where I was on my betwixt and between, we want volunteers, we don't want to chase them away, and we have chosen to be elected, right? We as officers and board members have chosen to sit in these seats, perhaps it's not quite the same. And then the last thing was, in the complexity, is it perhaps too prescriptive?
Too restrictive,
Too
Prescriptive.
prescriptive. For specifically directors or for any volunteers, or
Anybody.
anybody, directors or otherwise.
That's kind of why we focused in on directors and board officers.
I know.
But you're
some
thinking
portion
even
of
it may be
you
too
know, I really-
harsh, it may be too harsh for officers and directors.
Not saying harsh, I'm saying too prescriptive. You're being too detailed, too, you don't just tell me to ride a bike, you're telling me, well, you have to pedal and you have to change the gears and you have to do this and you have to.
Are you saying that within the norms or within the process within the process piece, or the actual norms that we would be signing up to?
It would have been under 2, in the section 2.
So the norms.
The other norms.
Okay. And that, we want to look at that, if it's too specific.
Like 9 through
Here's why
6.
we did it.
Yeah.
There are about 40 of them. So actually what we did, we read through all of the records from all the previous deliberations,
Yeah.
the reviews and all this, and there were more than 40 of those recommendations. We combined, we winnowed, we eliminated duplications, we added some ourselves, but I would say 80% of what we have here, or 75, let's say,
Yeah.
comes from what all of these stakeholders said during this earlier process.
yeah.
So these are
Working
the
with
these are the
quantum.
things, and sometimes the very words, of what people were concerned about when they talked about ethics
Yeah.
for rest and association. So, but that's helpful feedback, you know, if it's too prescriptive, too niggling, you know.
I think it depends on.
We need to hear that.
I think that would be depending on how it's used. I mean, it's in the execution of them that can get needle. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
You know what I
and
mean?
that's really my first,
What's a
you know, if
promise
I
mean?
can.
At what point have I promised to
Are
do
you
that?
finished, Julie?
Yes, I am finished.
Okay.
We didn't quite mean it that way.
Michael, would you?
Right, you finished.
So my comment is really around the implementation, right? This is pretty comprehensive, all good things. We went through this exercise 3 years back. I was part of making comments standing there during that time, and I guess we used quantum even then, right? So this conflict of interest has been, and governance issues have been pretty important for us in the last 3-4 years. We have been looking at that. So and this is good, it's very good, it's complete. It really comes down to how are we going to take this, translate this into something that can actually be implemented, all of these, especially all the different sections. You know, Julie talked about a couple of sections, right? Signing a COI document today, it's not very comprehensive, if you see that, right? It's very basic today what we have. And that will evolve, you know, because things happen during the course of the year. You're doing it at one point, right? So I think implementation and follow through is going to be so developing a mechanism, a way to do that, I think is going to be pretty important to get this. How do you measure something? When do you know that this is something that somebody needs to do it? So I think we need to think about that a little bit more.
Thanks, Sridhar.
I'm not in charge at this point. He is.
Yeah. Yes. Kate?
I think it's very important that this document also apply to the CEO.
You're one of the, I'm sorry, I didn't say, she's one of the officers, and I left it, in my recitation of the officers, I left it off. Shame on me.
No, can I add
Shame
something?
on you.
And
You are
the
included.
alternative.
You're included.
And the
So
future.
can I add something? I was actually thinking that we might do something separate, which is why I didn't bring it up. My guidance would be CEO as well as, you know, the officers of, you know, the executive officers as well.
Well, let
Who are-
me have.
So it includes the directors and the officers, which are president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and CEO.
And her direct reports.
Let me ask,
Her direct
let me ask
reports
Kate
is
to
the CFO.
respond to the direct report issue, because it's my understanding that you have something else in mind.
We have a handbook, an employee handbook. We have, as you all noted in the preface, a set of core values that were established in collaboration with the board back in 2009. I was contemplating sitting here whether it should also go down one level
One level
on, we
below.
call the directors, the
Yep,
senior
the
leadership
directors,
team.
yep.
And that would include legal counsel in-house, by the way.
Yep, yep.
So I was contemplating that, thinking that that's what it should also
It
be.
should.
So, you know, it would be in-house counsel, you know, all of the director level positions. Because I do believe that these should apply.
It should apply,
And,
yes.
Um,
It should apply.
at a minimum CEO and in-house, because those two positions directly report to the board of directors, right?
Yeah.
At a minimum. So if
You
we're
know-
talking about upholding directives of the board, this would be the correct body. So I need to ponder that a little bit more, because we do have processes in place for folks who don't follow policies.
Right.
So, and within the handbook. So there's a little bit of a demarcation point there of who it should apply to. Definitely the CEO and definitely.
Yeah,
in-house
from
counsel.
from an HR perspective, I mean, you have some employees, and they're going to be subject to the code of ethics and the ethics committee finding them, you know, guilty.
And that's a question. I can see the CEO and the in-house counsel position.
Yeah.
Because those are directly reportable
Yeah.
to this body, to the board. But if we have a staff member who's violated a policy of the organization, whether it's in the handbook policy or whether it's a policy of the board, then I got a problem. And that's a personnel problem that needs to be dealt with. And that's,
I think you have to be careful of that HR side.
Right.
yeah,
Because they're subject to employment law,
exactly.
not board governance.
Maybe not something for us to.
But
put our-
when
put our-
in-house
put
counsel
our
go
finger
for
in.
it.
No, no. Public companies, public corporations, this is normal. Executive officers in that case are the CFO, the Chief Operating Officer, the Treasurer, if you have in fact a separate position inside the company. They are subject to, you go to public companies, you can see the Code of Conduct Governance. Click on governance, you'll see who are the signatories to that. That's standard. There's no reason why this is a public company from my perspective. Everybody's, we are working for the public. So I think it's okay to do it. We just have to find a way to structure it in a way where we don't get into this, but the HR issues. But it's pretty standard.
Yeah, the problem
pretty
that
standard.
David pointed out, I want to come back to, and that is, if for example, if the, I could see including the attorney, the in-house attorney,
I do too. They report to the board.
but because they report to the board. But precisely, department heads do not report to the board. And this code gives the committee and ultimately the board power to fire,
Right.
which I think would be a problem.
Too.
Okay. So
Well, it's been noted, Sridhar, and that's one of the additional things we're going to look at.
Yeah.
I would
No, I mean,
appreciate you looking at that.
we're exchanging ideas and noting it all down, and please annotate your copies.
Yep.
Give us your frank
I will,
comments.
yes, yep.
Did you have any other comments, Sridhar?
No, that's it. It really is going to, we do need to, one other, which I was going to do with the CSF contract as well as, I would like for the contractors to sign a conflict of interest statement every time, a standard form that says, that's attached to the contract, that is available for the public to look at on the website. A COI statement that they assert as part of signing the contract that there are no conflicts.
I think that's a very good idea.
Yep.
Pretty standard, whether you're a public or private entity, that you
Yes,
have to do that at the
absolutely.
contracting stage.
But it wouldn't be this.
Yep.
No,
It would be like-
no. It would be a more
It
simplified.
won't be, it
statement.
is
You'd
a
see it in
simplified
a
statement that is with specific reference. Again, standard, you sign NDAs, you sign COIs.
Sridhar is not my uncle.
Yes, exactly.
Are there any more, Eric?
An observation, a comment. I guess the observation is that my compliments to you guys for doing this business. When I first read it, I thought, well, these seem obvious, and then I thought, well, I would be hard pressed to actually enumerate them as obvious as they are, because it really does take that's a mental exercise to do so, an intellectual exercise. And the second is that this, as a body, the board has fallen short of this many times in the recent past, and so it is commendable and yet sad that we have this and need it. Far less profoundly, I have the misfortune of reviewing a lot of government contracts, and the word shall is one that gives our folks hives, because shall can either be made to mean will or may, depending on who's at fault. And so I think you mean will, where I've read this in the document, and I would just consider saying will, because you do say may in certain places. Just an observation.
Okay? We'll consider that, and I understand.
We
that.
shall consider it.
Perfectly done. Yes.
Even though in colloquial
Yeah.
language, it's usually used inversely, shall really means future and will means you will do it.
Right,
And
as a directive, yeah.
But we'll clean up our language.
It's a suggestion,
As
it's something,
needed, as
something
needed.
that comes up in our
We'll scrub it.
circle. So something to
For
be
the
mindful
review.
about. Yeah.
Any other preliminary overall feedback from the board? If not, John?
I have one more thing.
Okay, one more thing.
This is just more of a question, maybe comment. So when we talk about the potential removing or reporting of board member or for violating this, and it goes to the committee, which is made up of proposed two board members and 3 community members.
Right.
I think we've all seen boards that there may be one or two people on the board that are very passionate in a civil kind of way, but very passionate, and sometimes you see, for lack of better words, factions on a board. And I would be nervous that you give the board and some committee members that could be, community members that could be part of that, to get rid of people that just disagree. They look for something in here and they say, you know what, and the person can appeal, but they're appealing to the same board that potentially wants to get rid of them anyway, because they typically don't agree with that person or person's perspective. So I don't know how you guard against that, but I would be concerned.
We were actually concerned about that generally, and that's why we thought it was important for it to be board members and community members.
Yeah.
How are the
Because you're less
community
like,
members
your factioning's
chosen?
a little bit more challenging.
How are the
versus
community
board.
members chosen?
Very carefully.
Well, yeah,
No,
but.
no, I mean,
By whom?
we would really want to choose
By the board
people
of
who are
directors.
wise and have, personal probity. I mean, this would be one of the more sacred positions in the whole of RA, I think.
So you don't address how the general RA members would be selected in this document, or did I miss that?
No, we didn't
Yeah,
address it.
that's again the implementation thing. How is the process?
Right.
So I do have one addition I forgot on the composition. I'm glad it's a 2:3, 2 from the board and 3 outside, because that's something that I asked for
Yeah.
3-4 years back as well, and that wasn't there. The second thing I was arguing for those days is, and we should think about, is the directors that are on this committee should change every year. They should not serve for 3 years. They should change every year so that we have.
The directors, but not the members.
Members,
The members 3 years,
again, we
the
can change,
directors
but the
annually.
directors
Like that.
definitely.
I like
Whether
that.
the members we have for 3 years or not, I would say the directors on an annual basis, they need to
That
circle
should
out.
be, again,
How does
just like we
everybody feel about
select.
that?
Yes.
I think that makes sense.
I like that, because that also
The board changes, the
prevents
makeup of the board
factionalism.
changes,
Yep.
and then.
deadens the factionalism note if you
Yep.
keep having to change them.
It could be done as part of your committee selection
Yeah, that's
process
what
at
I
the
was
beginning of every
Sure
year.
could.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So the staggered 3-year term would only apply to the 3
The community
members.
Yeah.
You can even
justice.
shorten
The
that if
justices.
you want. Even that you can shorten.
Point taken.
I mean,
So-
there's no reason.
So when you
But
say
definitely
that,
the
and
board
then we talk
members.
about doing it at the same time as the election of other officers,
committees.
do you want to say that they serve, there is a 1-year term limit, or every year
1-year
it
term.
must be voted on?
No, they cannot, somebody that served 1 year will have to cycle out.
So it is a
Cannot
term
serve on
limit.
it
I
again.
think so too.
And that, is there consensus on that?
Cannot serve on it
I
again.
think it goes directly to
Reasonable.
Sherry's idea
Yep.
of a power base.
Yeah.
Seems
Well,
a reasonable
I would
approach
think
to start
when
that
we-
way.
When we push this out to the community for
Yeah, we'll see,
comment,
yeah.
we say that that's a possible alternative to
Yes.
what is presently here.
That's what I would.
I would actually love to see us go out to community members that serve in roles potentially.
Ethics experts?
No, I'm thinking more like people in our community, like clergy, or people that aren't. No offense to all y'all, people that aren't at every meeting and know
All our sins.
know all
The
that.
fewer meetings, the better for them.
People-
Yes.
But people that can look at
Unbiased.
Yeah.
unbiasedly look at something and might not
I
even.
want John and Erwin on.
No, we.
There you go. There's our 3 committee members right there.
When I,
Patty, John, Irwin.
I really meant it
Two of
when I
us, we've
said
got
it.
You forgot
people
Ed.
sitting on this committee
Ed Appen's not here.
have a very sacred role.
They do.
Well, yeah, that's
They
what brought
do.
up my idea.
I can do
Yeah.
it
They
too.
do.
idea.
So the second, as part of the implementation, right, one of the things, if they cannot, anybody that is serving on this committee should not be part of the selection process of the external members. So something that
Yeah.
says that, to that effect, should be part of
Yeah.
this as well.
So, you,
So the 2 members that are picked to serve on this committee,
The board
for say,
directors.
let's say for 2017, from the board of directors, cannot be part of the selection committee to select the
The
outside
3.
members, the 3.
If-
2 don't
if I
select
could-
the 3.
A friendly amendment, right?
Yes.
So I would assume the BOC would pick those
Yes.
folks, so they
Yes.
would
So
have
they
to
should
abstain
recuse
from any
themselves.
vote, right?
They have to
on-
recuse themselves from
Right.
that
Well, the
discussion.
BOC would interview, but the whole
Right.
board.
They would have to abstain
They would have
at
to
any
recuse
stage
themselves.
in that process.
Right.
If they were on the BOC and it's
there's
a
my
general
concern
board.
about that.
Yep. Mhm.
Sherry mentioned concern about factions on the board who might gang up on other members.
Right.
So there are 9 of us.
Yeah.
If you remove that by 2, there are 7.
Right.
So what you've done is reduced the variety of persons and viewpoints selecting people. That's my concern. You've reduced the variety of viewpoints among those selecting the external candidate, external members, by 2. You know, and so you may lose some of the balance because we're asking for a 2/3 majority. We want the whole board almost by acclamation to say, yes, these are the guys we trust to be on the
And
ethics
those,
committee.
those general members are going to
Right.
serve
So-
more than 1 year,
We're
so.
reducing the number of those giving a perspective on that by 2, which makes me a little uncomfortable. It's not impossible, but I just wanted to express my discomfort.
It would also be taking away a vote that you might not have the right to take away.
Right,
There you go.
Yep.
yeah, and I think since the general members would serve more than 1 year,
Ultimately, this will be a staggered thing. This will
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
one person a
One
year.
person per year.
Yeah.
I would agree that with
We'll
John,
have
that
to-
maybe those
Okay, we've got, I think we have
should be
to
able
move
vote
on.
too.
Yeah, we got to move on because we need to cover the most complicated part, which is the
Oh,
Section 6.
conflict of interest stuff.
to the easy part.
Oh.
Any other comments, though, general comments? Thank you for these. Please do mark up your copies.
Okay.
Yes.
So now the next one.
Ah.
And see if we can be clear about this. Oops, I did it, I went the wrong way. So I'm going to handle this in 3 steps. What are the issues with the current COI policy and statement? Secondly, what are our recommendations in dealing with those issues? And then getting your guidance on it, okay? So, and so you have before you, well, you have a copy of the current document here, but summarizing it. Issues that have been raised with the current version are under policy, undefined terms, noticeably personal interests. So personal interest is mentioned many times, it's never defined. Economic interest is mentioned many times, it's defined. So, but generally, the problem of undefined terms. Secondly, the definition of immediate family member, we'll get to this, and we've had discussions about this. Too broad, too narrow, whatever. And then, if I could only read.
Which one, the third bullet? point?
Indirect interest?
Indirect interests and direct or immediate family.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. And then under the statement, good Lord, I need to get.
Here, let me give you this.
Well, no,
You sure?
let's see.
Don't do that to yourself.
Go walk over
No,
there.
no, I can see now, okay. So the statement, generally put, it's the tension between transparency and privacy rights, okay? Which is no little thing, because if we make the infringement of privacy too great, we may lose some really good candidates.
Which was a huge point of discussion with the 3 of us trying to figure
Right.
that out.
And Erwin, who has attended several of our BAC, Board Governance Committee meetings, brought this up. And it's right, that we have to find the right balance between transparency and privacy rights. So that's the general issue. One is listing the employers of the immediate families. Issues have been found that too intrusive. Probing into our assets, probing into loans, probing into memberships in organizations that are Reston-oriented, and saying, what the hell does that mean, first of all, and do we want to restrict that? And then finally, the closing certifications. So we've already changed it. We've already changed the closing certifications on this sheet because one was downright wrong. It said it cited a section of, I can't remember whether it was a deed or bylaw, but it incorrectly cited it. So we need to make sure that we get the closing certifications at the end right. So those are the issues. So how do we propose to address those?
Okay.
So on the policy, undefined terms, we propose to have a section which defines key terms in the policy. Secondly, focus this document, as noted already, on financial conflicts, only dealing with financial conflicts in section 2.2 of the code. And the reason we do it is did a lot of research about trying to find finding models that, not for the conflict of interest statement, policy, but for the statement. Not everybody does these big disclosures except at the point of choice, because that's the most critical thing. And if you look at state law, when you're making a choice to do something in a transaction, that's when you have to make your declaration of a conflict of interest. All disclosure is secondary, and it supports that. The main thing is disclosing at the point of choice how to deal with a transaction. So where do we get models for statements? So we finally concluded that the best guide available is found in the Virginia State and Local Government Conflict of Interest Act, and it's accompanying what they call it, better than conflict of interest statement of economic interests, or statement of financial interests, because we're not talking about conflicts yet. We're just talking about what are my interests that may lead to conflicts. Yep. So we're guided a lot by that one state thing, and in the document that I've handed out to you, the one sheet document here, this thing with a little red at the bottom,
Yep.
it gives you, if you're interested, it gives you the website, the web address of that conflict of interest statement, which guided us in this. What is the definition of immediate family member? So we decided, after much discussion and frankly some uncertainty, to keep the present definition that we now have in our document, which is very extensive. I mean, it's, almost your second cousins. It's almost down to that, but not quite. And we did that mirroring the Virginia State and Local Government Statement's definition of relatives rather than immediate family. However, when it comes to the state's own statement, they use immediate family and not relatives. So what are the definitions? Oh. So let's look at it. Look at this sheet.
Yeah.
So if you'll look at it, what we've done is a comparison of RA's conflict of interest policy and statement and the state and local statement of economic interest. So in terms of interested parties, we talk about immediate family, and it includes spouse, child, whether natural, adopted, related by marriage, parents, grandparents, siblings, all that. You can read the whole thing. They go on forever. The state and local government statement of interest defines in their definition section both immediate family and relative. Relative kind of comes close to our definition of family member, but in fact I've gone through it 3 times and I can never find a place in the statement where they actually use relatives. They define it, but I can't find any place where they use it. Instead, they use immediate family, which has a simpler thing. It says a spouse or any other person who resides in the same household as the officer or employee and who is a dependent of the officer or employee. So we need to decide which way we want to go. And the reason we chose...
Children.
Huh?
Well, the dependent live in the same household.
Dependent children. So it's only dependents. The reason we chose this is we wanted, if anything, we wanted to err toward the more rigorous.
Yeah.
okay? At least for an initial statement. Huh?
Yep.
Well, yeah,
That's true. That's true.
good point.
So do you want feedback on this now or later?
Well, no, we're going to ask for feedback, exactly. So,
Doesn't speak to significant others, yeah.
As we say cohabitant, that's
yeah.
everyone's comment.
Yeah, why don't we talk about that section for a while, and then we'll talk about the statement. So this is on the policy.
Okay, so, so my guidance would be to stay with the, or at least my preference would be to stay with Western Association's current conflict of interest. I do recognize, the loans and income and, assets. We don't necessarily have to list the value, which I don't think we do anyway, right? But it's very easy to have, an external counsel or an internal counsel typically receive the documents, all the details, all the interests, and actually provide an assertion to the public that I have reviewed, right? I've done this. And this is how we do it, and we did it in public companies. That's, the documents are not public, but every year you would sign, and any time there is a material change, you actually disclose it to the internal counsel and the external counsel. And it's always to the board, and if necessary to the public, right? It's the external counsel that would assert that I have reviewed. It's a periodic assertion. I have reviewed, and everything is clean, right? And we can implement something that says that, but I think that step I don't see here. But
What about the definition of family? I mean,
I would leave it like it is.
go with RA. Okay.
Leave it like it is.
Do you guys want to understand kind of why we moved away from it? It started to become very difficult to define when you have adult children living elsewhere that you don't know who they work for.
Yeah.
Or for me, my parents, they're retired now, but before, I didn't know who my dad's last employer was. It was his business, not mine. And it's not germane to any discussion we have here because it is not in the general area. So what we were trying to do is we were trying to make sure that we were focusing in on what mattered.
Yeah.
And, so what my sister does in North Carolina, y'all don't care,
Yeah, you don't, yeah, true.
right?
Well,
But if you go with the RA one,
We do.
you have to care.
You have to
Yeah.
Yeah,
talk
you don't
about your
have to,
sister.
okay, so RA1, we do have to
Yeah, so,
care in the sense that, do we have to list where they work and all that
Yep.
stuff?
Yeah.
That I think we can,
That was kind of one of our
so
starting points where we had a lot of discussion.
We'll get to that when we get to, so this is on the policy. When we get to the statement, we'll get into those kinds of issues.
yeah.
Ken, let me just clarify, get a reaction, your reaction to something that Sridhar said. He pointed out that their documents, their disclosure documents are not public. Ours would be accessible to members, wouldn't they?
No, the document can be, the main document can be, but the supplement information with the, in terms of, we're providing, specific, it need not be, yeah. Yeah, personal information need not be public.
If you're talking about this being a document that's signed.
If it's an RA document.
being On the board of directors.
Of course.
And a conflict statement, it's open to any
Yeah.
member of these, it's not open to the public,
Let's hope
but
we
it
get any
definitely
member.
would be open
To
to
the
any
membership.
member of the association.
Which
So my neighbor,
we
which
deemed
is
some of it
supposed to be public.
some of it is problematic
Yeah.
to get out there. Because it's a
But I
little
think-
hard to control when if it's personally identifiable information that is really not relevant, it starts to become very hard for us to manage that it's only staying within the membership as opposed to anybody didn't realize that it's only for the membership.
I think ownership of interest is ownership of assets, and
We'll get into that on the
That's
second
important.
issue. We'll get,
you don't have to get into the value, but we
we'll
definitely.
get into that on the
Yeah.
second side and next slide. But what do you think of, so Sridhar is for keeping our definition of immediate family. How do others react?
Well, if you're telling me that the RA's definition means, like Victoria said, that she has to state
Everybody here.
state
Everybody
what
listed
her
here.
sister in North Carolina does and who her sister in North Carolina works for. I mean, frankly, it's kind of crazy. I focused on who lives in my house, right? I didn't think in terms of, well, what does my extended family, wherever they live, that's.
Well, and that was part of the challenging
Yeah,
conversation we had.
Right, and
So if you're telling me I filled out the COI wrong, please don't fire me yet. But,
yeah,
yeah,
it says the employers of all family members, and we define family members in the broad way indicated. So I think there was a lot of confusion.
Well, and part of the confusion comes from the next sentence. The term also includes any other family member who resides in the same household.
yeah.
So the implication is that that should apply to the top part too.
Yeah, it's
But it
almost
doesn't
like
say
I think that it shouldn't say also includes, it should be, that's part of the premise to me, is that
It's
they
kinda like
reside in the same.
The definition.
All
I think
these
that is the
people are
definition
immediate
in my
family
mind.
members,
Mind,
and they're
that
That is the
pregnant
definition. That
if
other
they
word.
live in.
Well, if you actually look at the
People depended on-
if you look at the two sentences, the current RA definition, if you take out that first sentence,
No.
it's not terribly dissimilar to what we have in the state and local
Yeah.
statement. I would say that it does cover it a slightly better way in that it does envision less traditional types of living arrangements,
Yeah.
which is probably a better standard for us to be using.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think it comes down to that first sentence we just found so problematic.
I agree with that.
If it comes down to listing their employer or, something like that, right? I mean, we don't have to go immediate family, I think to the extent that we can, we should list. Sometimes you can update it as it goes on. Let's say, for example, we are signing a $2 million contract with Dewberry, right? And you have a relative, you have a brother or a sister working in California, right? But there is so you step up and you say that I have this, I know this contract is coming up. I want to make a statement saying that I want to disclose that I have this relationship, and then you're okay, right? All of it doesn't have to be in the same statement right at the beginning of the year, whenever you sign it, and that's it. That's not the end of it. At least that's the way that I would.
That goes back to the discussion of the duty to disclose
It is-
when it's
Yeah,
your duty to
exactly.
disclose.
Yeah.
You disclose it, because you can't cover comprehensively every little thing, but when it arises, it's incumbent upon you to, self-select and come and
And
self-elect
again,
and.
we carefully define conflict of interest in the norms as where I advantage myself directly or indirectly,
Right.
including those close to me, in a way that disadvantages
Right.
RA. So if it advantages both, there's not necessarily a problem unless there are financial issues, but at least non-financially. In fact, it's desirable that I feel advantaged if I do what's for the advantage of RA. To have a coincidence
Yep.
of interests is much better than having a conflict of interest. So you can see why this is so complex.
And disclosure is fundamental.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a-
So we'll have to
So
discuss
that's
in the
that's the
policy.
way that I would suggest implementing it, and
So let me ask you this, so we can move on for
Yeah.
direction.
right.
Would you like us to play with some combination of the state and local statement of economic interests, notion of immediate family,
Mhm.
and perhaps the second sentence in our current one?
Right.
Would that?
Yep.
Some combination of that?
That's fun. Yep. That's good.
Yep. I like that. Pondering.
I'll wait and see what you come up with.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we might have to do many tries at this.
Yeah, we may have to. I
That's
think
the
this
right
is
place to
something that will
start.
require a little bit of wordsmithing
Yeah.
and.
But that's why the RA one's actually pretty good, where it discusses, as well as anyone who shares living quarters with such director under circumstances.
Let's
resembling
move
a
on.
marital
Let's
relationship.
move on. Okay, so then we get to the statement part. Okay, and you can glance at so we have the policy, and then you look at the statement, which is this here. So again, the issues on the statement, let me flip over here, are, again, a lot of the problem with the specifics about assets, loans, and so forth depends on who you define as your immediate family.
Right.
If you make that easier, you make all of those
Right.
individual items easier.
Yes.
So we're thinking that we would keep the assets as it is, perhaps making it a little more clearly, because if you look at this sheet here, this is my, I summarized all of the information required on the state and local form, this little table here. So you can see they have schedules A through I, and it talks about the particular interest, it talks about the interested party, and it talks about a minimum dollar threshold, okay, for these various things. But you actually, and David and I were saying, when we worked for, respectively, Fairfax and Arlington County, we had to fill out all of these schedules A through I every year, every January.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is how they do it, and it's actually not far from what we do, although ours is kind of a more free-form reporting. They don't have, schedules A through, we don't have schedules to A through I. But all reporting assets and so forth become less vicious if we tame down the definition of family member, first of all. But then with assets, we need to know, do we want to say that, so one of the distinctions in conflict of interest is whether they're material or non-material. Non-material means insignificant, financially insignificant. So the board in its previous document has said that $500 is the threshold for what is significant. Do we want to keep that $500 threshold?
I would say no. I think we need to take it up. It's too low. I think we need to have a materiality test, which is.
So you can see here what the state does. You can see what they consider thresholds. I find these thresholds too high.
Yes.
No, the state thresholds are $5,000. That's what I said. To be material. Well, I told you we will talk about these things, yeah.
Well, so a personal debt, 5,000 would include my mortgage?
No, mortgage is excluded.
Okay.
Also, we put on there as far as loans from financial institutions, which RA has business dealings unless such loans incorporate the same terms available to other qualified borrowers.
David came up with that well-crafted definition of a loan.
So if it's your everyday average mortgage,
Very good.
Not that big a deal. If you somehow got a sweet deal with Northwestern Mutual Life, we'd like to know about it.
Yep.
But for the average,
So the important thing is, if the deal you get is a deal available to everybody else, then you don't have to report it.
Right.
Okay? So unless again, somebody doing business in Arlington gave you a sweet deal on a mortgage loan, then you'd have to report it. So then, membership in an organization, in organizations that are RESTN-oriented. Our recommendation is to eliminate that from the statement and regulate it by section 2.2 of the norms. So let me read, there are 3 norms that we specifically suggest might cover it. And they are, and the problem is, we tried various ways of dealing with that. What is an organization? What is it informal or formal? And I mean, so is your bridge club? Do you report your bridge club? If you get together with a buddy and drink beer and talk about what's going on in RA, is that an organization? So it becomes hard to define that. I think what that's trying to do is make sure that that you don't get groups who are trying to, take control of Reston. They're plotting to take over Reston. I think that's what that was trying to get at. But it's so hard to define that without also including other harmless groups.
Yeah, I
So-
think if you apply an incorporation test to that, right? If somebody is organized as an entity, I think that test is good enough. And after that, you go into a self-election, right? And you're part of an influential group that's not incorporated, then like Reston 2020.
So
Right, and
you're
yeah.
Sure,
you're
yeah,
suggesting
Reston-
Then you
this would be-
disclose it at the time when you have to disclose that. And this.
So John, why don't you go through?
So let me tell you what the norms are. So 2.2, let's see, it's 2.22, 2.24, and 2.26, which read, perform their duties with fairness and without bias for or against any individual, members, or group of members, directors, officers, staff, contractors, or vendors. 2.4, not use their position as directors or officers, whether in the course of official RA activities or not, to advantage themselves directly or indirectly in a manner that disadvantages RA or harms its reputation. And 2.2.6, not make official RA decisions based on family relationships, friendships, or other affiliations in a way injurious to the best interest of RA. Is that enough? Some will say we need more teeth. Some would say the teeth are going to cut people unnecessarily.
I think that it's pertinent for the community to know that, if you're a member, if you are an active member of, say, Reston Citizens Association, Rescue Reston, there's some grassroots organizations, I think Reclaim Reston. To me, those are important things to know. And I don't think by simply saying, I've got this ethics, this guideline thing, that gives the membership enough information about
Okay.
your involvements.
So you would like to see a disclosure about that sort of membership.
So how do you then, because this was the key thing for us, how do you differentiate that from, say, a coffee clutch of, ladies from your neighborhood, you guys want to talk about stuff, and because
Well,
you're a director, they're going to pick your brain from time
That's
to time.
where you have the test, right? If you say Rescue Reston or let's take an unincorporated entity like Reston 2020,
Yeah.
right? You look at anybody that has any kind of interest in Reston issues, they would have heard of Reston 2020, right? They wouldn't have heard of the coffee club.
Right.
So that's the test, right?
Yeah.
So you have to apply your judgment in that case and say that, yeah, this is something that everybody knows. I'm a founding member of Reston 2020. I'm going to put it there,
Right.
right? So it's different.
So
there's-
I belong to Reclaim Reston, and
You
I
should.
actually modified my disclosure statement. I thought.
You have to.
But it's not, it's a very disorganized, it's a
That's-
leaderless group,
okay.
unincorporated.
Right.
So,
But you represent,
but I put it on there anyway.
you
Put
should,
it on there
because,
anyway.
because you represented yourself, you stood there, you stood in so many forums,
Right.
and have talked as Reclaim Reston. You have. So you've represented a public position. So you, so I.
So
the
I
problem
think
is, how do you define
the
that?
problem is, I think the problem, what we're going to have to do is say, no, it doesn't, it's more than being an incorporated entity.
Yeah,
Right.
it is.
But it's less than being, or it's less than being a coffee clutch.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to come up with something like that.
It's like the power of
And,
influence.
yeah, you can incorporate, and I can, help draft that as well. The test is
Is
really,
Wilson Chamber of Commerce, is, Public Art Reston.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a number of those kinds of organizations that are very Reston-oriented, that
I
if.
don't think that we were looking for a way so that those weren't listed. We were just trying to find a way so that there wasn't, this particular item wasn't used as a cudgel against any particular board member for having groups of people that they chatted with, whether they were formal or informal. If it's formal, then probably.
But I think.
But we need to
the
decide
ones
what that
that are more
formality is.
formal, we know that they are.
But again, your book
Politically
club
active.
could be super formal. You could meet so regularly for years and years and years.
Huh?
And do we care? Probably not.
Well, their focus
No,
is.
we don't. Because,
Right.
I mean, if they are
Right.
taking a
As
public
opposed to an
position,
organization that's focused
And
on
that's what we were
interest
trying to
and
get to.
active activity.
activities
That's
of
what we were
Western
trying to get to.
Association, yeah.
That
And its
affect, like,
members, yeah.
yeah.
I think that's really the
affect our
test.
community.
Yeah.
I'm not
So
sure.
that's- as
book
long
club
as we
affects
have
my
that-
community.
I mean, what the public would construe as a public organization, whether it's incorporated or
Public facing.
unincorporated. That's,
And-
some language that says that. What in, the public, the general members would construe as a public Western organization,
Okay,
right?
so.
Because if I'm voting for somebody, or I would want to know some of that.
Yeah.
Who are they involved with? You know,
Okay. Comments from other board members? Let's work to see what we can come up with.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what I heard
Yeah.
say, not necessarily incorporated,
right?
could be formal or informal, but it is, and I heard the Chamber of Commerce.
No, she said chamber.
I'm just
That is
throwing
incorporated.
organizations out.
The Chamber of Commerce is an incorporated entity, so I'm talking about even to pick up unincorporated, even if unincorporated, what would be construed as a public organization by the members.
What are we
by
trying
the
to get
other
with
members.
this? Where are we trying to go with this? What's the goal of knowing these things?
Just listing all the things.
But
that's all.
why? What's the point? I'm just asking. Because I'm thinking, you join a bike club and they're all Restonians and you talk about what's going on in Reston or this or that. Does that constitute
No.
a membership to something? I mean, you're very informal. You meet every couple weeks whenever anybody can get together. I mean, so this can get very squishy and,
Okay, I'm happy to discuss that, but that's a different stakeholder.
It's 7 minutes till the hour.
Okay.
Let us
Okay, work on,
let us
let's,
work on something and come back, okay?
Don't make friends.
I don't have any friends anyway. It doesn't really matter.
And then finally, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
And then the closing certifications, we'll work on that. Can you take a look at the statement and the current declarations?
On the very back, addendum A.
The two.
Yeah, see, so this is the real old one. So, for example, the second certification is dead wrong. So it says the information provided in this statement is true and accurate. I understand that falsifying such information will result in my immediate resignation from the board of directors pursuant to section 35D2 of the first deed of amendment to the deed of dedication. If you bother to read that, it doesn't talk about that at all.
Right.
What it talks about is not disclosing at the point of action, of choosing to act.
Oh, okay.
It has nothing to do
With
Yeah,
whether you
with the
falsify
disclosure
this.
statement.
But it sure looks good.
It looks good and
Now
now
it's intimidating. Yeah.
so that's.
How about we strike that then?
So anyway, we actually, where's my folder somewhere here? We changed it, and so I think all of us signed a different statement this year because we knew that was wrong. So it currently says, I have read the Reston Association Conflict of Interest Policy, and I understand that my willful or grossly negligent failure to disclose a conflict of interest pursuant to Reston Association's government documents on any matter on which I vote
That's better.
will result ipso facto in my immediate resignation from the board of directors. And that does mirror the
I like
side
the
of
willful as well, because.
And then I understand.
You've got 9 different
It
versions
is
of one
it's my
entity.
responsibility to report any material changes in the statement as soon as reasonably practicable. It is my responsibility to disclose any real or perceived conflict prior to voting on any matter which may involve the conflict. So, anyway, we may stick with those, or we may fiddle around a bit with it. Okay.
Okay.
So this is.
Just a point of clarification, nothing's been changed yet.
Right. I didn't think I signed something as lengthy.
No, we talked about redrafting it to that.
Yeah,
our
now
later-
we have not, we needed to have this discussion
Right.
before we sat down. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any idea how to do this.
But you're okay with what John has read as something we should be looking at?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
For the
Go down.
declarations at the end, for the certifications.
You can give us
at the end.
those words.
Okay, in the last 3 minutes, we have the calendar forward. John,
That's your baby. Or do you want me to do it?
why don't you just,
Okay.
let's,
Okay, so again, the goal is, starting at number 4, that we want, Kate made a commitment based on our commitment that we would have this done by December. And we can do it if we work diligently.
Of 2017.
Yes.
Please, God.
So going back to 1, 2, and 4, 1, 2, and 3, how to get there. So we wanted to complete the conflict of interest policy and statement, which your humble ethics subcommittee will work on drafting. Then we will have a further board review of the whole code. And when you feel it's ready to, the community can now see what's already on parts 1, 2, and 3. Okay? But we'll get together and do a tasteful signature page together. But that's
Right.
easy. Okay. So then the community review process. So a question is, I would like to leave at least a month and a half where it's out in the community, and we offer the community structured ways to give feedback on this, so we can see because the whole thing is for the Reston Association membership to have confidence in their elected and appointed leaders. That's the whole point. That makes sense?
yes, yep.
Okay.
What are you going to do with all that feedback?
We will evaluate it and then come back to the board, or hopefully the board will be there when we receive some of the feedback. And we'll decide what we think is for the common good to point out.
So can we put this out there now?
Well, it's
For the-
already
Already out.
Right.
So
but I mean,
parts
for
1,
to
2, and
begin
3 are out there.
Yeah.
The only thing that's not there is the
Conflicts policy.
conflict policy and statement,
Yep.
statement and policy and statement.
Is it your thought that there would be, we have those informational kind of, nights?
Say that again?
Well, sometimes we've had a session where the public's invited to come and discuss.
So
I mean-
let's see, I'm going to start even sooner than that. Would you like us, as part of this week's RA News, to do a little, hey, it's out there, we're interested in feedback,
Yeah,
come to blank,
Right?
come,
Watch this space for a date and time to discuss it.
well done. Okay,
yeah, I think
Yeah.
we have to.
okay.
Because I think
But
it's
here,
a
go
little
take a
bit, we
look.
talk about, being
'Cause you want a
reasonable
little
with us
bit more.
making
And
decisions.
if your
it's a
office
little
would be the point of
pressure.
contact for receiving comments, and then you feed it to the ethics subcommittee, okay?
We could even have comments go directly to
Good.
Board Governance Committee at ra.org.
Yep.
Yeah.
That'd be
Set
good.
up
That'd be
a-
very good.
That'd
that,
be good.
okay?
We could, yep. To that end, we will have, the subcommittee we're going to have a follow-up meeting soon, but we are not going to do it in the context of a governance committee meeting tomorrow. It has been canceled. I just want to get that out there.
You've had
The
too much of
governance
each other?
committee has been too active,
Yes.
hyperactive recently.
You guys deserve a break. You guys did a fabulous job.
Absolutely, this is a
Fabulous.
fantastic
you.
document.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Yeoman's work there.
And I think we've come to the end of this work session agenda, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. We're adjourned. Thank you.